3 weeks before my wedding, when I was 20 years old, two buggies came up our lane on a Tuesday morning, and my mother looked out the kitchen window and said, "Take off your apron and put on your good one. They are here to look at you." I want to tell you about the inspection, the one nearly every Amish bride goes through before her wedding day, the one nobody outside our world has ever heard of, because it is never written down and never explained. And I want to tell you about the second inspection, the one that came after, the one no one warned me about at all. I did not have a word for it yet, that Tuesday morning. I only knew my hands were shaking as I tied the good apron. You have to understand how a plain marriage begins. It does not begin with the two young people. It begins with two families, and a church, and a set of rules so old that no one remembers deciding them, and so strong that no one would think to question them. When a son tells his family he means to marry, the women of his family have a duty, and the duty is this. They must satisfy themselves that the girl can carry what she is about to be handed: a household, a garden, a table that will feed harvest crews, a home that will hold church when its turn comes. In the plain world, a wife is not only a person you love, she is half of an entire working farm, and no family hands their son to a girl whose bread does not rise. So they come to look. And that Tuesday, it was his mother and his aunt and the deacon's wife, who had no official reason to be there, and needed none, because everyone understood that her eyes were the eyes of the church. My mother served them coffee, and then, in the most natural way in the world, as if it were simply a visit, the inspection began. His mother asked to see my hope chest, and I knelt in front of it and opened it, and she went through it with both hands. She counted my quilts and turned them over to look at the stitching from the back, because the back of a quilt is where a lazy needle hides. She held my table linens up to the window light, looking for thin places. She looked at the hems I had sewn at 14 and the ones I had sewn at 19, and she nodded slowly and said nothing, and I stood there being read like a ledger. Then it was the kitchen. My bread was on the counter, because my mother had made sure there was bread, the way a general makes sure of her ground before a battle. The aunt broke a loaf open and pressed the crumb with her thumb. The deacon's wife asked me, not my mother, me, how many quarts I had put up last summer, and did I do the beans with a pressure canner or the water bath, and what did I do when a seal failed? She was not making conversation. There were right answers. And then his mother did the thing I have never forgotten. She took my hands, both of them, in both of hers, and she turned them over, palms up, and she looked at them for a long moment, the way you look at a horse's teeth. She was reading my calluses, checking that the ridge of hard skin below my fingers said garden, said wash line, said scrub brush. Smooth hands on a plain girl are not a compliment. They are a warning. She looked up from my hands, at my face, and she said the only sentence I remember word for word from that whole morning. She said, "Well, you are not decorative." That was the compliment. That was the whole verdict. You are not decorative. I lay awake that night not knowing whether I had been honored or priced, and I am 40 years from that morning now, and I am still not entirely sure. Years later, my sister-in-law told me what was said in the buggy going home, because she was in it, a girl of 16 squeezed between the women, and girls of 16 are furniture to women like that. They forget you have ears. She told me the deacon's wife spoke first, before the buggy even cleared our lane. She said, "The bread is honest." That was the first thing said about me, the whole of me, 20 years of me. The bread is honest. Then the aunt said my seams were straight, but my hems were proud, which meant I had used a finer stitch than a hem strictly needs, which meant either that I cared for my work or that I thought highly of myself, and the aunt let it hang in the air so it could mean both. And then his mother, my Amos's own mother, was quiet for a long while, my sister-in-law said, all the way past the mill. And then she said, "She will not bend easy." And nobody in that buggy said anything after that, because they could not tell, any more than I could, whether it was praise or a warning. In our world, The highest thing said about a woman can always be carried both ways. That is on purpose. It keeps us guessing all our lives. Now, there is far more of this story than I can fit into one evening at this window. What the women said in the buggy leaving, which my sister-in-law told me years later, the talk my mother gave me the night before the wedding, which is its own story entirely, and not what you think. I have written all of it down, everything I am never able to say aloud in our district, in my book. It is called A Quiet and Faithful Home, and it is in the first pinned comment below. But do not go yet. Please. Because I have not told you about the second inspection, the one that undid me, the one that came from him. The night before the wedding, my mother came to my room, and I thought, here it is, the talk, the one the English imagine our mothers give, and my heart was in my throat. And my mother sat on the edge of my bed, in the room that would stop being mine in 12 hours, and she smoothed the quilt with one hand for a while, not looking at me, and what she finally said was not what anyone imagines. She said, Sadie, tomorrow night you will want to cry, and it will have nothing to do with him, so do not let him think it does. You will cry because tonight is the last night of your name. Let it come once, get it done, and then get up and be his. And she stood, and at the door she stopped, and she said the truest thing she ever said to me. She said, They inspected your bread and your hems and your hands, child. But nobody can inspect what you keep in the small room at the back of yourself, so mind you keep something there. All your life, keep something there. And she shut the door, and I heard her go down the stairs, and I did exactly as she said, in exactly that order. I have never told my husband about the small room at the back of myself. He has one too. I have made my peace with his. That too is a plain marriage. The wedding came and went, the way plain weddings do. A Thursday, celery in jars on every table, 300 people, and a bride and groom who had never once been alone in a room together for longer than a buggy ride. And then everyone left. And it was evening, and I was standing in the kitchen of the little house that was now supposed to be mine, wearing a dress I had sewn myself for a life I could not yet imagine, married to a man I knew mostly from Sunday singings and one summer of letters, and Amish, my new husband, this quiet, serious man I had promised my whole life to, said, Will you show me the house? I did not understand at first. He had seen the house. He had helped his father and brothers set the very walls of it. But that is not what he meant. He meant the house as I had made it, in the weeks before the wedding, when the women had helped me carry in my hope chest and my dishes and hang my curtains. He wanted me to show him what I had done with it, and so began the second inspection. We walked through that little house room by room, and I showed him the shelf paper I had cut, the quilts, laid now on beds instead of folded in a chest, my grandmother's dishes behind the glass, the pantry, where I had already lined up the jars I brought from home, beans and beets and cherries like rows of dark jewels. And he walked behind me with his hands clasped at his back, the exact way his mother had walked through my mother's kitchen 3 weeks before, and he said nothing. Room after room, nothing. By the last room, I was near tears and holding them the way you hold a full bucket up a ladder. Because I thought, so this is my life now. Inspected at my mother's table, and now inspected at my own, and this is what a wife is, a thing that is checked. And then he stopped, in the doorway of the bedroom, in front of the bed, where I had laid the wedding quilt. The one my grandmother pieced the winter before she died, when her hands were already failing, so that some of the stitches wander like a creek does, and my mother had wanted me to put it away and use a straighter one, and I had refused. It was the one thing in that whole house that I had not made ready for anyone's eyes. It was just mine, and it was on the bed, because I loved it. Amos stood in front of that quilt a long time, and then he reached out and touched the border of it, where the stitches wander worst, where her old hands had struggled, and he said, quietly, Not really to me. She made this when it hurt her to make it. And I said yes. And he stood there another moment, and then he said, That is the only thing in this house I do not know how to deserve. And he took his hat off the peg and went out to see to the horses, because he had said more than he meant to, and men like my husband can only say a thing like that once and then they have to go stand in a barn. And I sat down on the edge of that bed and cried like a fool, because I understood all at once what I had gotten wrong about the whole thing. He had not been inspecting the house. He had been reading it, every room, the way you read a letter. All those weeks, the women had been checking whether I could keep a household. But that evening, my husband was looking for something else entirely. He was walking through the rooms trying to find out who I was, this stranger he had married, reading my shelf paper and my jars and my curtains, because I was written in them. And when he came to the wandering stitches of a dead woman's last quilt, he found the thing he was looking for. He found out what I loved and how I loved, and that I would choose a crooked thing made with devotion over a straight thing made without it. You see, I had been taught my whole girlhood that I would be measured, and I was. I will not pretend otherwise, and I will not pretend it did not sting, and does not sting still, the memory of standing in my mother's kitchen with my palms turned up like a mare at auction. The first inspection was real, and it was exactly what it looked like. Our world weighs its women. It weighs their bread and their hems and their hands, and it tells itself this is prudence, and maybe some of it is, and some of it is just an old hardness that gets handed down because no one dares set it down. I did not have a word for that yet either. I have one now. But it is in the book, not here, because here at this window I keep peace with my neighbors. But the second inspection, the one I feared most, standing in my own kitchen that first evening with my full bucket heart, that one was not a weighing at all. That was a man with no words to ask. Who are you, wife of mine? Asking it the only way he knew, with his eyes, room by room. And every year of my marriage since has been more of the same, if I am honest. He reads what I do, because I do what I am, and I have learned to read him back. The wood split before I wake, the heel of the bread taken so I get the soft middle, the chair he made me before he ever dared hold my hand. And I will confess something at this window that I have never said at a quilting, and could not. The years have turned, the way years do, and I am the older woman now. I have sat in that buggy. I have been taken along to look at a girl, because my age and my husband standing put me there, and the coffee is poured, and the hope chest is opened, and the other women's hands go in. And the first time it happened, I felt the old morning rise up in me at 20 in my good apron, shaking. And when the moment came, when the girl stood in front of us waiting to be read, and it would have been the most natural thing in the world for me to reach for her hands, I folded mine in my lap. I asked her instead what she liked to bake when it was only for herself. Nobody in the room thought anything of it. It is a small thing, the size of a mustard seed, and I do not fool myself that it changes our world. But that girl's shoulders came down an inch, and mine came down with them, 40 years late. There are fences I cannot move. I have told you that before at this window, but I have learned there are gates a woman can quietly leave unlatched, one girl at a time, and no deacon's wife has ever once noticed a gate that was simply never closed. So when the young brides come to me now, the frightened spring girls with their shaking hands, and they ask me, "Is it true? Will his people come and look at everything? Will they look at me?" I tell them the truth. I say, yes, they will come, and they will count your quilts and press your bread and turn your hands over in their own, and it will make you feel like a thing and not a girl, and you are allowed to hate that part quietly, in your own heart, where the deacon's wife cannot inspect it. But then I tell them the other thing. I say, and afterward, when the crowd is gone and the house is quiet, a man will walk through your rooms trying to find you in them, and that is the only inspection that will ever matter. So do not build your house for the women with the counting eyes. Build it with the truth of yourself in every corner, the wandering stitches and all. Because the counting eyes leave by supper, but the man who reads your rooms will read them for the rest of your life. Everything I have learned about being read, being weighed, and being truly seen, about keeping a home and a marriage and your own soul, all three under one plain roof, I have set down in a quiet and faithful home. It is in the first pinned comment. It is the fuller telling, the pages I could never read aloud at this window. And tell me in the comments, so the other wives know they are not alone. When you were young, who inspected you, and what did they check? And who, in the end, was the one who truly saw you? Sit at this window with me again. There is always more of the story than one evening can hold.